World, they say, is both expanding and contracting. Now that may sound paradoxical or even oxymoronic, but I think that is the best position to be in at the beginning of one's speech. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be speaking here at TEDxJadavpur University. My subject is the future of cinema. How do we reimagine the future in terms of cinema? Before going deep into the subject, it's important to point out where we are. The world is expanding because we are now becoming aware of issues of gender, issues of those whom we've othered, as Jacques Derrida would say, for so long, race, creed, new structures, new societies coming up. So it's becoming bigger. It's also becoming smaller because of the accessibility of information and the fact that we are able to reach out to so many people across the globe. So in this paradoxical situation, we are faced with a plethora of problems. And the world of cinema is not bereft of those problems either. As the old saying goes, you can fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time, and that might be enough time to become the President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, we are passing through troubled times, be it the United States or be it India. You could substitute the President of the United States with another name, not naming the person. Cinema began with drama, magic, and betrayal. It was a dramatic moment on the 28th of December 1895 when a train entered a station called Ciotat in the basement of the Grand Café in Paris. It was a momentous moment. The people stood up because they thought the train was upon them. But that was the moving picture. It was an illusion. That's how it all began. So it began with drama and with magic, but also betrayal. And this last word is going to be most important in the present context. Because although the Lumiere brothers invented the machine called the cinematograph, and they're credited as one of the inventors of cinema, Thomas Alva Edison independently is said to have developed a machine called the kinetoscope and another machine called the kinetograph, which also showed moving pictures. The only problem is he didn't invent them. It was invented by a technician called William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, who has not been awarded his name in the annals of history and has been left behind. So this is the story of cinema. It begins with betrayal, and we are being betrayed at every moment. We have to be very cautious, very alert, to see that this trend does not continue into the future. Now, today's world is a very, very strange world where the digital is woven into the fabric of our lives, where change is accelerating all the time. Its trajectory is exponential, and the convergence of paradigm shifts is the new norm. In such a situation as this, where does cinema find itself? To start from the ridiculous and then try to move to the sublime, I'm reminded of this famous doggerel by Ogden Nash. It's called Hark to the Whimper of the Seagull. And Nash, in his own voice, I have it on tape, says, "Hark to the whimper of the seagull. It weeps because it's not an eagle. Suppose you were, you silly seagull. How would you explain it to your she-gull?" The problem we are facing now is The problem that perhaps Marx didn't take into account is this problem of keeping up with the Joneses. The fact that the value of a product or an object is not intrinsic to it, but is measured by its relative value to others who view it as an object of consumption. So we are living in a world where there is, on the one hand, an ideological vacuum, which is proved by the governments in India and in the United States and otherwise, and a world where consumerism is the norm. So now, on the one hand, we should be happy that because of a digital scenario, many more people are being allowed to make films. And they're able to make films because earlier the cost of celluloid was prohibitive and cinema was within the domain of an elite few. So in that sense, it's very salutary that we can all make films if we want to make them. But having a camera in your hand is like having a gun in your hand. You can use that gun to protect yourself. And if you happen to do that on the Indo-Pak border and happen to shoot someone down, you may even be given a Paramveer Chakra for it. But you can use that gun to kill someone too, unlawfully. So just because you have the camera in your hand doesn't mean that you're going to make something of value, and that is the danger. We have to be responsible, whether we are working in the different fragments of this industry, in cinema, in television, on the net, in web series, in all kinds of digital content. This is an era of convergence, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. As I said, the key word here is the oxymoron, the paradox. We are both within and without. So in all of these media, where the shooting could be done on the same platform, you have to be extremely careful. And I hope that in the future, we move away from homogenization. The problem with the digital media is that it is tending to create a format, particularly at the post-production stage, where every visual is so beautifully painted using all the tools that you have to give you an artificial effect. The three-dimensional, rugged look of cinema is being lost, and that is a problem. And having done that, there are so many theories abounding about how this is enhancing the world of celluloid, which is no longer there. It's the world of cinema now. But talking about theories, I'm reminded of a story which I'm fond of quoting. And a good storyteller is, of course, one who has a good memory and hopes other people don't. You may have heard this story before. It's a story of Dr. Benjamin Spock, who is, who was a famous child specialist, a pediatrician, and he was totally opposed to corporal punishment. That was his theory. But one day he had to repair his house, so he brought some cement and piled it in front of his house, and the street urchins, they messed up the cement, and Dr. Spock was not pleased, not amused as Queen Victoria would not have been. He remonstrated with them gently and said, "Children, please don't mess up the cement," but they did it again. And then he got really angry. And he told them in no uncertain terms that he would take action if they did it again. But they did it again. And this time Dr. Spock lost it completely. He started picking up the children and beating them up. Amidst the howls of pain, a neighbor who was passing managed to ask him, "But Dr. Spock, I thought you didn't believe in corporal punishment." And Dr. Spock, who was busy beating up the children, quickly remarked, "My ideas hold in the abstract, but not in the concrete." So that was Dr. Spock. We must have ideas that hold both in the abstract and the concrete. It will not do to simply formulate theories, but in a rapidly changing scenario, as I have pointed out, where there is a complex interplay between all these forces, they create a disruptive stress and give you unprecedented opportunity. These so-called profound structures in industry, in ethics, in traditional transformation strategies all need to be reviewed and previewed. And that's what we need to do in cinema. Of course, with digitization, there is a great battle going on, a great debate, the grand debate as they call it, that so far as preservation of film is concerned, and this is very important, we somehow don't have a tradition for preserving. We want to bring down the cinema theater called Roxy after having done with Metro, not realizing the value of the architecture. But nevertheless, if we want to preserve the great cinemas, like say Dadasaheb Phalke's work, unfortunately Hiralal Sen's Alibaba is lost. If you want to preserve films from all over the world, then film is the only media in which they can be preserved. And so film has to make a comeback, even though political forces have pushed it out. The likes of Sony and Ikegami and all these companies are foisting upon us a kind of digital beauty, which, as I said, can be very artificial if you overdo the post-production bit. But finally, for the real look, it is cinema. And for preservation, it's cinema, which is why a man like Quentin Tarantino, who is doing his latest film, or has done it and is going to be released very soon, still prefers to work on celluloid. So that's the first question. The second very important question is once again related to corporal punishment and Dr. Spock's theories, is that cinema must now try to have a humane approach. That technology should not be the only factor determining the quality of the cinema. Cinema has to be humane. Cinema has to talk about universal values. It's very, very important. Of course, it has to be creative, both in form and content. When Pather Panchali was shown in 1955 at the Cannes Film Festival, where it won the Best Human Document, there were diverse reactions. There were some people who were absolutely mesmerized by the universal nature of the theme, although it was set in a particular specific culture. But there were others who couldn't take the fact that people were eating with their hands. There were some who came out of the hall. There was one Mrs. Flaherty, the wife of the great documentary filmmaker Robert Flaherty, who thought it was a documentary and was absolutely astounded when told that the role of Sarbojoya, played by the artist Karuna Bandyopadhyay, that artist was actually a professor of English. So diverse reactions, but a film which was universal, which had a humane approach, which was not a tragedy in the true Aristotelian sense of the term, because in the last scene, when the rest of the family, because Durga has died, that's why rest, go off, they are moving into another realm, and the door is kept open. So we need to approach a kind of cinema where technology, which is so masculine at times, so patriarchal, needs to be harnessed. The cinema cannot be dictated by technology. Otherwise, there will come a time when there is no cinematographer required, or even an artist, and everything can be done with your computer. In fact, there was a time when there was lots of softwares being developed regarding cinema. One was Movie Magic, and one such software was that you put in a story and then you got a script out of it, which is ridiculous, because the point of creative art is that it will vary from individual to individual. And the moment we move towards any kind of homogenization, any kind of template, cinema will lose out. Another story for your kind consumption, this happened in Hollywood. There was a very famous actor called Jake Colby, they say, and he was called by Sam Goldwyn once and told that the role of a lifetime was waiting for him. And that role was the role of Abe Lincoln. But to effect that role, he had to study Lincoln, research him, behave like Lincoln, start living like Lincoln in a log cabin, developing the sideburns, talking like Lincoln, walking like Lincoln. And he did that perfectly. But one day, disaster struck. One could call it an occupational hazard. He was assassinated. So that is the problem of keeping to the template. Let us now move towards a kind of cinema that gives preference to the individual voice. This is the future. To the voice of dissent, to the voice that speaks against the establishment, as was done by the great neo-realist movement in the mid-50s or in the mid-40s to early 50s. To movements like the Nouvelle Vague in the early 60s in Paris, similar to our movement in the 60s, where we had the Indian New Wave. So, one, the right to dissent must be respected. The individual voice must be given the opportunity, and big cartels and conglomerates must necessarily take a back seat. The voice of protest must be allowed to be effective, unlike in the case of a film which has been hampered in this particular state of ours, just because it criticizes a certain party or a certain government. Let there be a free-for-all. And let us, when we choose certain communities to make anthropological films, try and speak from the community, from the perspective of those in that community, and not as dikus, outsiders. So cinema must emerge from what we have. That is most important. And yes, experimentation is always to be encouraged. The avant-garde is to be encouraged, but one has to be careful, a word of caution. It should not be like that mad professor who combined a mixture of yeast and shoe polish for those who wanted to rise and shine. It must be such that there is a meaning to the madness, a method to the madness. As Hamlet says, I am but mad north, northwest, and when the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. Thank you very much.